All right, lower your voices and lean in real close to our digital campfire here. Because tonight's explainer, well, it isn't about data trends or market analysis. We're looking at a firsthand account of genuine, unfiltered terror. We're talking about a dark, isolated night shift that went horribly, horribly wrong. This is the kind of story that just sticks with you, lingering in the shadows long after your screen goes dark. Imagine the absolute dread of being totally isolated. You're just trying to do your job in a locked, completely empty restaurant in the dead of night. The only sound is that low, steady hum of the refrigerators. And then, suddenly, you hear a voice echoing from the shadows, shattering the quiet. A voice that has absolutely no business being there. Think about it. During the day, a fast food joint is bright, bustling, and completely safe. It's filled with the chaotic energy of families, coworkers, just everyday life. But at 2 a.m., that exact same space entirely transforms. Those bright fluorescent lights don't feel welcoming anymore. They really just highlight the heavy, vulnerable reality of being completely alone. And those large glass windows that let in the sun, they become pitch black mirrors, literally just reflecting your own isolation against the dark unknown outside. So our narrative begins with a desperate 17-year-old. They'd worked 3 months of safe, predictable day shifts, just trying to pay off college fees, when they finally caved to their boss's relentless demands. They needed the money, right? The pressure was on. So despite every gut instinct telling them to stay in the light, they agreed to step out of that daytime safety net and cover the dreaded midnight shift. Section 1, the midnight shift. The shift was a brutal block of time, starting right at the stroke of midnight and agonizingly stretching all the way until 5 a.m. It's this long, dark stretch of total isolation, bridging that eerie gap between late night and early morning. You know those hours, when the rest of the world is dead asleep and absolutely no one is around to help if things go south. When the manager finally locked the front doors and took off, the teenager was handed a strictly mundane list of chores. Refill the ketchup, mayo, and barbecue sauce. Scrub those greasy kitchen floors. Wipe down the empty tables. And they eagerly tackled these tasks, really hyper-focusing on the rhythm of the work, kind of using that busy routine to distract themselves from the creeping, suffocating emptiness closing in all around them. Section 2, alone in the silence. By 2 a.m., the atmosphere gets incredibly suffocating. 0 customers had walked through those doors. Dead quiet. The teen is simply standing behind the counter, arranging stacks of coffee cups in the absolute silence, when a sudden, heavy, unmistakable feeling of being watched just creeps right up their spine. It's that primal alarm bell in your brain telling you something unseen has its eyes locked onto you. Moving to Section 3, the black shape. Glancing nervously toward the large dining room window, the 17-year-old spots a strange black shape standing in the complete darkness outside, just staring in. Panic flares up, a cold spike of pure adrenaline. But naturally, they try to brush it off, right? Desperate to keep their composure, they literally mutter, "That must be my imagination," trying to convince themselves it's just a shadow, a trick of an exhausted mind playing games in the dark. Returning to clean the tables, they tried their absolute hardest to ignore that heavy feeling boring into the side of their head, keeping their eyes glued to the rag wiping the plastic surface. But a second, hesitant glance back at the window reveals something entirely horrifying. The ominous dark figure hadn't left. It hadn't dissolved into the shadows. Actually, it had moved significantly, silently, closer to the glass. Desperately trying to stay grounded, they told themselves it was just extreme tiredness. Sleep deprivation catching up after a long week of classes. They take a deep breath, squeeze their eyes shut, and force their focus entirely back to the tables, absolutely refusing to look outside at the pitch-black darkness anymore. The logic is, if I don't look at it, it isn't there, right? Section 4, I can see you. But that fragile concentration, it gets violently shattered. A distinct, sudden noise slices right through the dead silence of the empty restaurant. It wasn't the fridge humming or the building settling. It was a sharp, deliberate sound that instantly froze the blood in their veins. A voice muttered an impossible, chilling phrase from the darkness outside, that thick glass. Then, the horrific voice repeated it, much louder, vibrating through the cold pane of the window. The words dripped with terrifying intent, forcing the teenager to stop, freeze entirely in place, and look directly up at the glass. And what they saw waiting for them wasn't a prankster. It wasn't a tired traveler or a trick of the light. The source account explicitly describes looking directly into the blood-red, glowing eyes of a demon. A massive, towering terror staring aggressively back at them from the other side of the glass, its nightmarish gaze locked dead onto the teenager in the brightly lit room. The creature didn't just stand there staring either. It immediately began constantly and violently banging its massive hands on the window pane. The heavy thuds echoed like gunshots in the quiet restaurant, completely destroying any remaining illusion of safety those locked doors provided. The glass vibrated violently under the assault, literally threatening to shatter at any second. Which brings us to Section 5, the escape. Without staying a single second longer to see if the glass would hold, the teenager acted on pure, unfiltered survival instinct. With shaking hands, they slapped the closed sign onto the front door lock, bolted out the back exit directly to their car, fumbled the keys into the ignition, and sped away into the night, tires screeching as they ran for their absolute life. Still shaking uncontrollably on the drive, gripping the steering wheel so hard their knuckles turned white, they called their manager. But they didn't mention the banging on the glass. They didn't mention the towering black shape. Instead, they lied. They claimed they were suddenly violently ill and going home sick, hiding the truth because they knew a story about a blood-red-eyed demon at a fast food joint would just make them sound insane. Once they finally reached the safety of their home, locked the heavy deadbolt, and collapsed into a chair to catch their breath, a firm vow was made. They would never, ever work a night shift again. No matter the cost, no matter how much they needed that college money, even if it meant quitting the next morning and finding another job entirely. Because some paychecks, they just aren't worth your life. As we wrap up this explainer, it leaves us with one deeply chilling question to consider. Are you ever truly alone in those brightly lit, quiet hours of the night? Or is there always something waiting, just beyond the glass, watching from the dark? Keep that in mind the next time you find yourself alone in a seemingly empty room after midnight.